Okay, there we go. Well, let's get started then. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming and attending and listening tonight. So we will be talking about specifically with sport nutrition for soccer. So my name's Alison. I'm a registered dietitian, and I love sport nutrition. I'm passionate about everything to do with sports. And I'll talk a little bit about myself in a second, but before we sort of dive in, just a few Zoom items. Feel free to put questions in the chat box throughout the presentation, or unmute yourself to ask. If anything kind of comes up and you really want to ask, that's totally fine. We can address it throughout. I will leave some time at the end for questions as well. So up to you. Oops. Just try and admit, there we go. And so I will be using the poll feature and some whiteboard stuff as well, nothing too major, and I'll explain it as we go if you're familiar with those tools. Okay, so yes, like I mentioned, I'm a registered dietitian and very passionate about sports. I played golf at UVic, and previously to that was a big field hockey player and played lots of soccer as well. Lots of stragglers tonight coming in. After playing golf professionally for a few years, I returned to school to do a master's in kinesiology. And then it was after that I decided to go back and become a registered dietitian and really combine those areas. Very passionate both about the mental performance piece and sport nutrition. And I find it all blends in really, really nicely. So that's just a little bit of my background. Before we sort of get going, I would love to hear from you guys if there's anything in particular you're really interested in learning about, if there's something that you're really hoping to hear about tonight in this presentation. So can feel free to put in the chat. I'll also just put up the whiteboard if you prefer to write on there. So there should be a little bar either at the bottom or the top. It's always different for different people's Zoom. And there's a little text, so you can either type on the whiteboard or feel free to just put it in the chat. But I would love to just hear if there's any topics in particular that you'd really like to hear about tonight. And of course, feel free to unmute yourself as well if you prefer that. Lots of options with Zoom. So give about maybe 20 to 30 seconds to jot anything in the chat or on the whiteboard if there's any topics, or maybe you're just hoping to hear about anything and everything. All right. When and how, so we've got how to eat before and after training for either weight loss or muscle buildup. Yeah, absolutely. That body composition piece, pros and cons of supplements and nutrition, always a hot topic. Definitely touch on that. Anything else in particular from anyone? Okay, well, if anything does come up, feel free to put it in the chat. And otherwise, yeah, so we'll make sure to kind of address those tonight. And then, of course, if there's anything that we miss, feel free to bring it up at the end. Okay. So I will just switch back here. Lots of people coming in the room there. Okay, a few more there. All right. I'm also really curious if there's any challenges that you find in particular related to that could be nutrition related. And again, feel free to put this in the chat. Is there anything you find you struggle with? Is endurance near the end of a soccer game, or just sometimes what to eat, or finding the time to prep food? Just any challenges that come to mind that might be nutrition related. So I won't put the whiteboard back up, but feel free to put it in the chat box. Yeah, wondering about what to eat before a game. Definitely. That's a big one. And balancing that with what's going to sit well, but also provide that appropriate fuel for the game or a practice. So we'll definitely talk about that. Definitely a challenge. Anything else from anyone? What to eat during the game? That's a great one. So we'll definitely talk about that. Well, looks like we got a little whiteboard drawing showing up. Yeah, so those are great. So we'll talk about those. If there's anything else, feel free to, oh, God, went away there. Okay, perfect. Yeah, again, feel free to put it in the chat throughout. Okay. And ideal times to be eating before big meal snacks. Yeah, we'll definitely touch on that. Nutrition during different stages of training. Yeah, this is an interesting topic. And I actually, there's a community talk I'll be doing in January on periodization of nutrition and what that kind of looks like with the different stages. So yeah, we'll touch on that a little bit today, but more detail too in the new year. Okay, so a little overview of what we're going to go through today. So I'll talk about the importance of specifically nutrition for soccer. So soccer has unique requirements. So looking at those kind of unique elements of soccer and how nutrition can play a role with that. We will review just a little bit on the key macronutrients, just as a refresher. I'll kind of breeze through those fairly quickly, but we will talk about what those look like in terms of requirements and how to kind of choose sort of best sources that work best for you. We'll look at fueling specifically that pre-training, pre-competition, leading up to games, what to eat, timing, all of those sorts of things. There we go. And we'll talk a little bit about, I'd like to go into micronutrients and just some of those anti-inflammatory foods, because those will be really supportive for the recovery. So we'll talk about those a little bit, and then just some ideas for quick snacks or quick smoothies, because I know sometimes we just need really quick ideas, things that we can grab and go. So we'll look at those a little bit as well. So just as a little summary, I'm sure we all recognize the importance of nutrition. That's why we always want to learn more about it, but it does play such a big role helping us increase that lean muscle mass. So the question or comment earlier about, what to eat for sort of body composition and shifting that. So nutrition playing a big role there, helping with repair of damaged tissue, particularly in soccer where, there's sprints and agility and pushing off and a lot of force on the body. This causes that damage to the tissue. So how best to sort of repair that with nutrition plays a huge role for immune function. So see that a lot in the news these days with everything with COVID and the flu and lots of pieces with nutrition and just sort of a supportive role that it can play. Helps with our mental focus and thinking. And again, especially in soccer, maintaining that focus for the duration of a game is really important. And helping us engage in that training and competition to the best of our ability, improving that strength and power, decreasing our risk of injury, and sleep plays a really big role with helping with our sleep. So, food is fuel. It's a fuel for our bodies and our brain. It's essential for us to do all these different things, to move and to grow and think and a lot of different food fuels that. And it's made up of three main macronutrients that provide that energy, and as well as lots of little micronutrients, which we'll talk about, with the carbohydrates providing that 4 kilocalories of energy, same with protein, 4 kilocalories of energy, and then fat being the most nutrient dense with providing 9 kilocalories of energy per gram. So I wanted to just start off with some of these specific kind of unique aspects of soccer. And this is often what I'll do sort of working with an athlete in sport nutrition. So we'll look at that sport and think, okay, well, what are the unique requirements of this sport? And of course, that individual. So soccer does have really unique requirements. It's a combination of very explosive, movements as well as that endurance component. So a large aerobic component, maintaining that for a long duration of a game. And then there's also the position specific requirements. So just think a little bit about your position and the requirements for you as an individual, or you find that endurance piece is really key, and making sure you can maintain that for the full length of the game, and thinking about any gaps, areas that you want to improve, and how is training improving that. And then we look at, okay, so how can sport nutrition help you with any of those gaps and help you optimize your training and your performance in a competition? So other things, with soccer, considerations that we need to think about, I need to sustain that skill execution. There's constant decision-making and very rapid decision-making, and having of the focus and attention and quick response time. So these things really, they require nutrition to sustain that throughout the duration of a game. And as you know, we're covering a lot of distance out there. So almost 8 to 13 kilometers, depending on the level and the position and the individual, but quite high distances being covered. As well, shown that elite soccer players perform 150 to 250 brief, intense actions in a game, which is a really high amount. So, and each time there's one of those intense actions, there's a lot of force on the body requiring a lot of energy. So because of all of these unique considerations, we require all major energy systems. And then we'll really get into that with those sort of macronutrients, the carbohydrates, protein, and fat, and how those help support these different energy systems. So a big glycogen component in the beginning, and shift into the free fatty acids. And that we'll talk about the glycogen being that carbohydrate storage shortly here. So the explosive movements really do require the carbohydrates exclusively for fuel. So this is where really high importance that we have that storage of carbohydrates and that storage of glycogen in our muscles to be able to draw on to continue doing those quick movements. And then as the game goes on, we'll start to tap more into sort of the free fatty acids to support that aerobic, that longer duration. And then hydration also playing a really key role. But when our glycogen stores become depleted, it's not just kind of that physical fatigue that sets in, but absolutely the mental fatigue as well. Decision-making can become impaired, our focus can become impaired. And these things often we might not, realize or attribute to nutrition factors. We often think first, oh, okay, well, my legs felt really heavy, or I was a bit tired, that those might have been related to nutrition, but definitely the mental fatigue can come in when these glycogen stores are depleted. So I'll be talking a little bit about just guidelines for needs to kind of think about how many carbohydrates do I need to support this? But recognizing that everyone has individual needs, and there's a lot of different factors that will impact those needs, and these are still just guidelines. So a lot they'll be kind of done sort of kilocalories per kilogram of body weight, or grams per kilogram of body weight. So if you know your weight in pounds, you could divide by 2.2 to get kilograms. And then when you see any of those recommendations, can just multiply them by the number, and that's how you would get that kind of overall number. But just again, recognizing that they're just rough estimates. And I really encourage you to always tap into kind of your own intuition around these things. Okay, well, am I really fatigued? So maybe I do need to up my calories, or how's my recovery, and looking at those things. So these are just some guidelines. So just to kind of put some perspective for ensuring we're getting adequate fueling. And again, with these, I'm really treating it as making sure we get at least enough fuel. So looking at it from that sense. So a moderately active person, it's about 30 to 35 kilocalories per kilogram per day, but athletes their needs can approach quite high amounts, again, depending on the intensity and the training. And sometimes that can be challenging to balance those high calorie needs with sort of our GI discomfort and digestion. So it can be a unique sort of thing that athletes need to navigate. Female athletes in particular are at risk for insufficient intake. Again, this can kind of be sport dependent, but just recognize there can be a risk and this importance of adequate calories to fuel the high demands of soccer. And therefore the nutrient dense foods are going to be a really important piece to look at. Okay, so just before we sort of review these macronutrients, I just wanted to do a quick poll here. So I'm curious to hear how people feel about their sport nutrition knowledge. Do you feel really confident? Feel like you're a sport nutrition pro, moderate, or feel like you don't know anything, lots to learn? Okay, so, all right, so looks like we've got, everyone's answered, awesome. Yeah, so about 30% feel like you don't know anything, okay, and around 71% there, but moderate, fairly comfortable, but always more to learn. Yeah, absolutely. There's certainly always lots to learn. I feel like I'm always learning as well. No sport nutrition pros, okay. All right, so we'll stop sharing that. Just close that down there. Okay. Okay, that's awesome. Thank you. And just wanted to do one other one, just checking in on carbohydrates here. So I'm just curious which one you think is a good source of carbohydrates. And when I'm using the word good in the sense of providing like adequate or ample carbohydrates in the particular item. So which one of these items provides a lot of carbohydrates? Okay, got a few more here. All right, let's take a look. Okay, so the majority said yams. So absolutely, I would agree with that yams are going to be quite a carbohydrate dense food. So they're going to be a great source of energy. Carrots, yes, but you need to consume a lot of carrots to sort of get the same equivalent of carbohydrates as those yams. And then certainly, yeah, there are carbohydrates in peanut butter, though peanut butter will have a much higher sort of fat content and chicken will be solely protein. Okay, great. So I'll review these, but I'll go through them fairly quickly, just so that I can make sure we get into some of the other stuff, but just want to highlight the major roles of these macronutrients, especially this day and age where I feel like in the news and media, it's always changing, don't eat carbs, don't eat this. There's a lot of sort of, I don't know if it's fear around certain foods and macronutrient groups, but all three of these macronutrients, carbs, protein, and fat, have really amazing roles and are so important. And carbohydrates, especially in sport nutrition, are such an optimal fuel source. So they provide that rich source of energy for the muscles and brain during activity. They break down to that glucose, and that our brain's going to use that, and our body is going to use that in all these different reactions to provide that energy and do that decision making in all of those important parts of soccer. So again, the carbohydrates, the storage form is that glycogen. So it's stored in our muscles and some in the liver as well. Primarily during the exercise, we're tapping into that muscle glycogen. So we'll be talking a lot about the carbohydrates and glycogen when we talk about fueling sort of prior to a game and during, because of the importance of these to help with the fuel source. So if we think of carbohydrates, we've got complex and simple. So the complex carbohydrates are higher in fiber. They provide a much slower release of energy, and I'll show a little diagram of what this looks like in a second. And then the simple carbohydrates are broken down quite quickly. Bananas, sport drinks, white rice. So they provide very sort of quick energy, quick rise in our blood glucose. And I'll show that in a second, but just wanted to give some examples of great carbohydrate sources. We've got oatmeal, ground rice, bananas. There are those yams again, beans. And so if I refer to a serving, you can kind of think of just a fist as about 30 to 40 grams of carbohydrates. It can just be in easy ways so that you don't have to get bogged down with numbers, but can think of, a fist, or maybe there's a meal where you need 2 to 3. And that can just be a nice, simple way to think about that serving size. So like I mentioned, the simple carbohydrates break down very quickly into the monosaccharides, which just means one sugar, so a singular sugar, or the disaccharides with the 2 sugars. And they'll provide that quick increase in our blood sugars. And then the complex carbohydrates break down into the polysaccharides, so the many sugars, so the fiber, those starches. It's a much slower release. So I'll show, here's a graph showing sort of what I mean by that. So the simple carbohydrates being in gray, it's quite as soon as we take them in or ingest them, it's quite a rapid rise in our blood glucose levels. And then there can be that following drop off. And the complex ones, it's a lower release. So if you just think of an example of if you were to, I don't know, eat a bit of chocolate right now, so your blood sugars will go up and then they'll fall. And the complex carbohydrate, if you were to eat something like that, sweet potato or something with quite high fiber, it's just a slower release and then a more gradual drop off. So why this matters is thinking about what type of energy that you need, quick acting or sustained. And as we talked about previously with soccer, the importance of both of these things. So we might want the simple carbohydrates when we need a really quick energy top up, or during a soccer game or practice to keep up those glycogen stores, or afterwards. And like I mentioned, we'll definitely get into this in more detail and what that looks like, but just sort of setting the stage for that. Can't forget those vegetables, source of carbohydrates. They're just not quite, that is not quite as dense as some of those more complex or starchy carbs. Still a really important source of micronutrients, and we've got a good little section on that and their importance. But just aiming for 2/5 of the vegetables with each meal where able. So I'm curious, and you can just message put it in the chat, but how many people think they get at least 2 different vegetables in a day, and at least 5 servings? Which are sort of just general vegetable recommendations these days. So you can just say a yes or no in the chat if you like. Got a no, we've got a yes most days, no. What means 5 servings? Yeah, that's a good point. You could think of a fist as a serving, half a cup could be another sort of example as a serving. Got another couple yeses there. Yeah, my one of my nutrition classes in my first year, they asked because the Canada Food Guide recommendation back then was, did you eat 1 green and orange vegetable every single day? And I think only about 5% of people actually, could say that they had done that. So lots of yeses there. That's awesome. Okay. So, all right. So a few carbohydrate tips. So again, carbohydrate needs depend on a lot of different factors. But for moderate intensity sports that have a duration kind of 30 to 90 minutes, so 5 to 7 grams per kilogram just spread out over the day. So again, talked earlier about how to figure out what that would look like or how to calculate that. So if you know your weight in pounds, divide by that 2.2 to get kilograms, and then multiplying by 5 to 7 grams. And that can just kind of give a ballpark of those carbohydrate intake spread out, of course, over the day. But as the intensity and duration increases, or say you've got a soccer tournament, these needs can really go up. There is some good research to show that having some carbohydrates during a soccer match resulted in later, like fourth quarter performance improvements compared to a placebo. So there was faster sprint times and enhanced motor skills, improved mood. So carbohydrates absolutely having an important role to sustain for that near the end of a game. So when the duration of a sport is longer than an hour, that's where we might need some additional carbohydrates. So that 30 to 60 grams, but I'll show some diagrams of what that looks like, but just some general kind of carbohydrate tips here, and then we'll really dive into what that looks like. Okay, so I'll breeze through protein as well. Again, just really important. Protein makes up our muscle, our skin, our hair, plays such an important role helping with growth and repair of cells and our immune system, and that repair piece, that repair and building muscle. So this is going to really come into play when we think of sort of recovery, especially after intense training. So I'm just going to do one more protein question here. So what do you think is a good source of protein? And again, when I say good, I'm just referring to which one of these has a high amount of protein in it. Which one of these would sort of provide the most amount of protein? Okay, so all right, so yeah, chicken would be have the most amount of protein out of these particular foods. Almond butter absolutely does have protein in it and is a really great sort of plant-based option for some protein. Not a whole lot of protein in strawberries, so chicken would probably be that one here that definitely has the most bang for your buck for protein. All right, so here are just some examples. Again, if you wanted to think of kind of a serving size as sort of that palm of the hand, some people use sort of a deck of cards, chicken, turkey, fish, eggs, lots of plant-based options too. So hemp seeds, 3 tablespoons, you've got 10 grams right there. Tofu, edamame beans, really great options, chickpeas, nutritional yeast, beans, actually a lot of different seeds, pumpkin seeds and flax and chia, or some other really great plant-based options. So lots of kind of variety, and it certainly doesn't have to just be when we often think of sort of chicken or turkey. Incorporating some of these plant-based protein options can provide a lot of great benefit as well. So the recommendation for athletes is around that 1.2 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram per day, but it's really that timing we see kind of makes a difference. So 2 things with the timing. First being protein spread throughout the day has shown to be most supportive for the rates of muscle protein synthesis and supporting that turnover and growth. So if somebody was trying to increase their lean muscle mass, having that consistent protein throughout the day is going to be most advantageous for that. So rather than having, all your protein sort of at dinner, you have a little bit at breakfast, maybe that snack, a little bit at lunch, and just having that little bit that's consistent throughout the day. And then, of course, it's particularly important around that training. So whether this is gym training or practice or competition, having some of that protein around that will help with that rebuild and that repair. And then that overall supporting that lean muscle mass. There is a lack of evidence for consuming really high protein diets and performance, so doesn't support a need for going above that 2 gram recommendation per kilogram. All right. And then fats are our third macronutrient. Super important for so many reasons. Rich source of energy, help with the absorption of the fat soluble vitamins. And the example I kind of use is I often see these like these juices that are promoting all these wonderful vitamins, which is great, like vitamin A and vitamin E and vitamin K. But if we don't have a fat to go with it, we're not going to absorb them. They're fat soluble vitamins, and the fat's really important for that absorption of them. So if you are having one of those juices, just make sure to have some almonds with it or something like that to support the absorption. Plays a really important role in the immune system, brain function, synthesis of a lot of hormones and things. So fats play a really important role. Okay, I've got one more poll for you guys. All right, which one of these would be kind of the highest source of fat? All right. So majority said avocado. Yeah, absolutely. Avocado would certainly be that high source of fat. Chicken breast does have fat in it, but avocado would be a more dense option of fat. All right. So if we think of just sort of a thumb as a serving, peanut butter, almond butter, that quarter cup of avocado, hemp hearts, cheese, lots of sort of different options for fats. And with them, we want to try and choose the unsaturated ones where able. So the monounsaturated and polyunsaturated, these are associated with more health benefits. So these are our nuts and our seeds and our olive oil and avocado, things like that. And saturated fats absolutely make up part of the diet, but trying to keep that sort of under that much sort of smaller amount. And these are found in red meats and high fat dairy or baked goods. And omega-3s in particular, and again, we'll get into these in a little more detail, but the omega-3s found in oily fish and chia seeds, walnuts, hemp hearts, we want that ratio of omega-3s to omega-6 to be higher than what it typically is. In kind of a Western diet, the omega-6 is quite high. So just looking for some of these foods like the seeds and the nuts and avocados and olive oil can support with that. So with fats, this is where we want to avoid them a little bit around the training sessions. They slow down the absorption of other nutrients. They can cause a little bit of digestion upset because food will just sort of sit there and feel kind of heavy in our stomach. It takes longer to break down. So when I showed that graph earlier about the rise of the high glycemic carbohydrates and having a quick rise in our blood sugars, and then the complex, well, you can imagine fats just being a tiny line at the bottom. It's a slow release, slow sustained energy. And again, I've got just those omega-3 rich foods here, really important for anti-inflammatory and brain function. And despite lots of buzz these days about ketogenic diets in terms of sport nutrition, there's no evidence to really support their efficacy in athletic performance. And there are some studies that show it may even decrease performance. So just in terms of kind of contribution as fuel, I mentioned earlier, soccer requiring those different energy systems. So just the takeaway from this image is in low intensity, you can see it's primarily this light gray. So if we imagine a really low intensity, a long walk or something like that, we're primarily using 3 fatty acids and breaking down those fatty acids from the adipose tissue, and then we're using that as that fuel. As the intensity increases, we use more of that carbohydrate fuel, breaking down that muscle glycogen and using the carbohydrates to fuel that intense activity. And in very high sprints and things, it's solely, especially in the first sort of few seconds, it's really tapping into right away the carbohydrate fuel source. All right, so let's look at timing. So this was a lot of people kind of had these questions: what do I eat before and what's best going to fuel me? So when we think about, again, the unique demands of soccer requiring that balance of those macronutrients, so about 3 to 4 hours before, this is a pretty balanced meal. We want those kind of low glycemic carbohydrates, the high fiber carbohydrates that'll provide that sustained energy. So, your whole large flaked oats, at least 4 grams of fiber in those, or whole wheat bread, or some brown rice, things like that for carbohydrates. And again, depending on your needs, could be 1 to 4 fists. When I sort of use that image again for a serving size, some protein, having some fat and fiber in there, and then fluids, of course, as well. As we get closer to competition, we just want to reduce the fat and fiber. And now we're working on making sure we've got those carbohydrate stores ready to go, that protein again around the exercise to support any sort of repair and rebuild, and still fluids, really important. And then 30 to 60 minutes before, this is kind of like your top up of carbohydrates. And some athletes, maybe you don't find that necessary for you. Some people may like having a little bit of, half a banana just 30 minutes before. Just something small is just a carbohydrate type food. I'm not worried about protein or fat here as we get closer to the game. And then of course, still having some fluids. And I don't have it. So here are some examples, but there is some good evidence to support that having a bit of carbohydrates quite close, just providing that extra little top up, is beneficial in soccer, especially getting near the end of the game. And I'll get into that a little bit more when we talk about during, but here are just some examples again for leading up. So, you kind of have to think about, well, what time is that game or that practice at, and then work backwards from there. And you know what, maybe you won't have the luxury of 4 hours before and then 2 hours before, because maybe your game's at 9 a.m. and you don't want to get up, 4 hours before then. So you might need to adjust this a little bit, or adjust those portion sizes a little bit. But some examples, again, the oatmeal, Greek yogurt would be a great protein source, some berries, some nuts and seeds, just a really kind of balanced meal, and some water. Another example, having like a whole wheat chicken sandwich. You've got some protein there, some vegetables in the sandwich, the whole wheat bread. As you get a bit closer, that 1 to 2 hours before, a granola bar, some banana and milk, small bowl of cereal. Again, you're just decreasing the fat and fiber, just having some carbohydrates and protein. And then the 30 to 60 minutes before, again, depending on if that works for you, but piece of fruit, some yogurt, or maybe this is where a sports drink may come in, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. So during training, how long will those glycogen stores support that, let's just say training and competition, but how long will those glycogen stores support you and your energy output? So in really, really high intensity, those glycogen stores can become depleted in almost 30 minutes. I'd put soccer in the middle here. So carbohydrates probably last that hour. So if it's, a practice that's maybe 45 minutes to an hour, maybe you don't need to top up with any carbohydrates. You can make it through, no problem. But as you've got a game that's a bit longer in duration, this is where you might need to look at, okay, what kind of fuel do I need during the game to help make sure that I don't sort of crash near the end, and that my decision-making and my attention and my quick movements aren't impaired near the end. So once those kind of carbohydrate stores run out, the body will try and break down other things to get glucose for that fuel. So it's not as efficient. And the body will begin to burn more fat, which is good for the endurance, but just won't support that really high intensity. So what does that look like? Would look like having some carbohydrates and fluid during the exercise. So the recommendations around 30 to 60 grams when that exercise duration is longer than an hour. So if we're thinking about, the length of the soccer game, if that's 90 minutes, then having some carbohydrates can really support that near the end of the game. And there's definitely some good research to support those, that improved performance when there is some carbohydrates ingested. So you want it to be really easy to digest, low in fat, low in protein. We're just looking at the carbs here. So this could be maybe a banana, some dates, that's a sports drink. Again, not necessary if it's under 60 minutes, but over, could make a homemade sports drink. I do have a recipe for this. If you are interested, you can always email me and I'll send it along to you. Because yeah, it doesn't have to be a Gatorade or a Powerade. You can certainly make your own, making sure it's got that 6% carbohydrates and a little bit of sodium. And these are great options to have during that can just support you and make sure that it sustains you for the full length. And of course, drinking those fluids will be really important. Which brings me to that hydration. So many benefits of adequate hydration: lower heart rate, higher output, lower perceived exertion, has shown improved performance. So just a lot of benefits of staying hydrated, and not that we need to go nuts and a way over, just adequate hydration. And for exercise under an hour, water is best. For exercise over an hour, it's where we talked about that sport drink to get some of those carbohydrates and to also replenish electrolytes. So that sodium will be really important there. With hydration, daily hydration is what's important. We don't want to sort of fall behind on it and then sort of chug. We want to just make sure it's just consistently, sipping on some fluid, particularly within that sort of 24 hours of training and competition, and making sure, especially in that 1 to 2 hours before. Again, this water is the best for that hydration. And then this is where that carbohydrate electrolyte solution can be helpful at the start of the game and then during to maintain the carbohydrates, to maintain those sort of glycogen stores, to help with those electrolyte replacements. So thinking about, when you have the opportunities to hydrate, because again, you can forget. And so wanting to think about, okay, during practice, making an effort to consume some, and where are the opportunities during a game, particularly if there's warm weather and high amounts of loss of sweat are occurring. Sodium is going to be really important, and just really making sure that we're replenishing that fluid that's lost and those electrolytes. So with our recovery, there are a lot of benefits to consuming some of those carbohydrates and protein within that 30 minutes, especially if the next training or game is within 8 hours. That'll really help with that recovery if we get that nutrition in right away. If the next sort of training or session or game is greater than 8 hours, then within an hour is fine. So immediately post, trying to get some carbohydrates and protein. And then, 2 to 3 hours later, that can be back to that balanced meal with our high fiber carbohydrates, some fat and some protein, lots of great vegetables, but immediately sort of post game or post training, trying to get 1 to 3 fists of carbohydrates, 1 to 3 palm of protein, and fluids. So think rehydrate, refuel, and repair. So again, examples could be, homemade smoothie with some muesli and Greek yogurt, or some granola and Greek yogurt. Lots of different options. Again, thinking of the list that had up earlier, and just kind of picking and choosing and pairing some of those together will really help your recovery. With recovery, and this is amazing how this is one that I really feel like often gets overlooked, but micronutrients play such a big role in supporting recovery, and particularly saw this in my work at UBC, and a lot of athletes in res, if they didn't have a fridge, they didn't have a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables and not a lot of access to those, and we're definitely at risk for just struggling with some of that recovery and really sore and tired, and these were often kind of the missing piece. So here are some key ones. Just looking at calcium in the diet, and it doesn't have to just be dairy sources, which often is where we first think, but there's lots of great plant-based alternative beverages, but looking for ones that are fortified with calcium is really important. So you'll either see on the ingredients, or you'll see the calcium go up from 0% or 5 or 2% to about 30% in that ones that are fortified. Vitamin D is limited in food sources. So there are, fatty fish as vitamin D, eggs, but it's limited. So sometimes this is where a supplement could be helpful for people, especially in the winter months, and especially in Canada. Vitamin D, can definitely, it's quite a common one to support people with, since it is challenging when we're not getting a lot of sunlight. Iron, a really important one, increased needs for vegetarians and for females. And iron, not saying you need to go to a supplement route. There's lots of great food sources, but just sort of being aware and wouldn't go to supplement until that's sort of tested and checked. So if you are curious about your iron stores, or maybe you're feeling a lot of fatigue and cold, and then it could be worthwhile to check to get a blood test and get your hemoglobin and your ferritin and get those iron checkpoints sort of checked out to see where they're at. Omega-3s, and I'll talk about those in a second here, because they're going to be really important for helping with that anti-inflammatory. So the fish and the chia and the flax. If our overall diet and energy intake is adequate, you're likely meeting all of these. It's really if calories become quite restricted or certain food choices are quite limited, that's when maybe at risk for some of that deficiency. So I won't go into these in too much detail, just out of the interest of time, but B vitamins as well, really, really important because they're so involved in energy production and different reactions that go on in our body. And in particular with sports, so thiamine, really helpful for that metabolism of glucose and can impact that exercise performance. And I do want you to think, when I talk about these micronutrients and these different vitamins, really talking about food sources of them. And I've got a chart that show them. So sometimes when we hear vitamins and minerals, we think supplements. I'm really talking about food sources of these, just trying to get those varied food sources to support all of these. So maybe I'll just jump to my little table here to show some, and then I'll backtrack. But as you can see, the vegetables that we talked about earlier when I posed that question is because they're such a great source of so many vitamins and minerals, especially those B vitamins. So our leafy green vegetables, asparagus, sweet potatoes, think, colors as well, the red peppers and carrots, they're all such wonderful sources of so many vitamins and minerals. So that's why if there's any opportunity to incorporate these in throughout the day for you, whether, adding some spinach into a smoothie, adding a little bit of a side salad, throwing in some berries, just finding little ways to sort of add those in. But lots of, as you can see from this chart, lots of great food sources of these vitamins and minerals. And like I said, if we have adequate calories and a variety of food sources, likely meeting all of those needs. If you want to see this chart, it's at the USADA.org, and there's a big athlete section on there. So it just sort of has a nice chart with some good food sources. So also just wanted to touch on, again, when we think of that recovery piece, antioxidants will also help with that recovery. And these are compounds that help sort of counteract damaging effects of free radicals. We won't go into those, but just know that vitamins will kind of help with these. And there's lots of from different food sources of their berries and, again, the leafy greens that provide a lot of these great antioxidants. And it's not that more is better, just, again, that variety from food sources. But recognizing that they work synergistically together. And this is where I see a lot of supplements get lost. Scientists get excited and they see benefits of something. And so they make it into this very isolated kind of purified form, and it actually loses a lot of its benefit. So for example, lycopene in tomatoes, this is one that scientists saw there was some benefits with prostate cancer, and so made it into a supplement, and then actually it lost a lot of it. It wasn't nearly as sort of effective with its benefits. But when you pair the tomatoes with garlic and broccoli and other foods, as well as some fat, it works really synergistically together. And that's where we see more of these benefits. So I just put a few other examples here of nutrients that work really well together. Our iron and vitamin C. Vitamin C helps increase that absorption of the iron. Fats and those fat-soluble vitamins, multiple B vitamins work well together. So in just simple food terms, this means wherever there's opportunities to, add a few seeds on top, throw a few hemp hearts into a stir fry, add some sesame seeds in there, throw a few pumpkin seeds on top of a salad, just finding ways to sort of boost those a little bit because of those wonderful synergistic effects. All right. And then just with inflammation, and again, post-sport, there's lots of inflammation that can come from, those quick movements, and inflammation absolutely is a great thing. I mean, acute inflammation is normal. It's a normal process. However, we want to avoid sort of chronic inflammation and make sure that so the inflammation occurs and then it subsides and it's not prolonged. So a lot of great anti-inflammatory foods. And I mentioned earlier with those omega-3s, such as the salmon, the flax, walnuts, leafy greens have a really anti-inflammatory profile. So it just helps with the body kind of go through that cascade rather than a pro-inflammatory cascade. Dark vegetables and yellow vegetables, different fruits and berries. So anything that's really kind of bright, or sweet potatoes, carrots, peppers, lots of wonderful spices, ginger and garlic. And then also with helping with that inflammation in athletes, hydration, of course, with water and adequate sleep. All right. So in terms of, I was a lot of things I sort of threw at you guys tonight, but in terms of just how to, bring those together and incorporate them in, I really encourage people to pay attention to what works best for them, for the individual, and recording in a journal and noting your performance and your energy levels can be so insightful. And I find sometimes this is easiest just freehand. So noting, okay, what was your breakfast today? How far before, that practice or game did you have it? Did you try a little carbohydrate top up 30 minutes before? And how did you find you were feeling? What was your performance rate on a scale of 1 to 10, your energy level? And that's where you can start to really notice what works best for you, because there's a lot of individual variation. And then that way practice your game day nutrition so that when it comes time for that game, what works best for your body and how you're going to feel at your best. So there are, some apps that can be helpful in terms of showing the amounts, like a MyFitnessPal or a chronometer, and that can show you if you're curious, well, how do I get 20 grams of carbohydrates? And you can kind of plug in things there to see what that would look like. But in terms of figuring out what works for you, I really do encourage just a little bit of journaling, and it doesn't have to be, an everyday thing. You could just do it a little bit and then find, okay, this works really well for me. And then you've got that and you've got it written out. And so that you just, and you have it. So I just wanted to leave kind of a few easy take-home ideas for you guys, and then we'll get to questions. I know grab-and-go snacks can be really helpful when we're on the run or just do a prep in advance. So here are just a few ideas, preparing a little parfait ahead of time with some Greek yogurt and some fruit. Again, that's where you could add some of those seeds and chia seeds or things on top. I did put a chia seed pudding here. I find this is a great grab-and-go one. 3 tablespoons of chia seeds, either a milk or a plant-based alternative beverage, blend in some fruit or cut up some pieces of fruit, or you could do a peanut butter banana flavor or some cocoa powder. Lots of options with that, and it thickens into a really nice pudding. And you could prepare this the night before and just grab it in the fridge and go. Hummus and pita, a homemade smoothie, pairing, an egg with a pear or a piece of fruit with that protein and fat. Making a homemade energy ball with different oats and flax and different seeds and some peanut butter and honey. I find protein pancakes or waffles can be a really nice option too, that you can make ahead of time for a few days, and then you can just grab them made with eggs or egg whites and banana and cinnamon and some oats and almond milk or some almond flour in there. So just a few ideas to think about how you can pair some of these foods together and make really easy options that you can take on the go. And then just have this as sort of, if you're making your own smoothie, ways to kind of really get a nice sort of balanced smoothie. You've got that base of whatever that fluid might be for you. How to add some of that protein, whether it's, like a Greek or skyr yogurt's a really high protein yogurt. Sometimes a protein powder can be helpful for people. And this is, I just encourage sort of my little burg to have an NSF certified or an informed choice certified one, just so that it's been tested and there's no banned substances in it or anything like that. But you can absolutely make your own homemade protein powder, blend together some hemp seeds and chia seeds and some flax and add some cocoa powder or cinnamon or something. And you've got a great little protein powder that can keep in the fridge for quite a while. Can add in your fruits and veggies. And then of course the extras, the fun ones, the nut butters or avocado or some coconut oil or different spices, different flavorings. So just a little blurb on that, but so I wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions. So just to wrap up, I know we went through a lot of different things. But soccer has really unique demands. So looking at all three of those macronutrients that can support the fuel for those energy systems. Of course, with carbohydrates being really important, especially around and during that training and competition. Choosing the nutrient-dense food choices when able, just to get all those micronutrients, all those vitamins and minerals, because as we saw, there's so many roles that those play as well. The carbohydrates and protein post to support that recovery, and also looking at that balanced meal later, the 2 to 3 hours after, with those anti-inflammatory foods, and then hydrating with quality food sources, water where able, or less than an hour, and then once it's over, a sports drink. So we went through a lot, but I would love to see if anyone has any questions or anything you'd like elaborated on, and happy to answer any questions. All right, so I see a few in the chat. So I'll just start with those. So while on protein and fats, what is your opinion on protein fat like diets, example, keto? Are there, yeah, this might have come in before I mentioned that blurb. So the evidence with ketogenic diets and sport in particular, so really talking about that specific context, is pretty mixed, with some showing it can decrease performance because of the importance of glycogen and carbohydrates as fuel, especially in sports that have really quick agility and quick kind of power output movements, like soccer, that requires you to sprint and change in direction. Carbohydrates so important for that. So it's not ketogenic's not recommended for sport and for performance, and the evidence is pretty mixed, with some indicating that it does decrease performance in those sort of high intensity sports. Next question is the pill form of these vitamins just as good as eating a substance containing the vitamins? Yeah, great question. I really encourage the food form because of the reason I was talking about, with the synergistic effect of food, and we lose that in its form. So there are absolutely times where we may need like a vitamin or mineral supplement, like maybe somebody has an iron deficient anemia. And yes, that's where an iron supplement could be really important. But generally speaking, a food form is going to have far more benefits and way less risks. A lot of pill forms of these vitamins, we don't want them in really high doses. So there can be some negative effects, whereas we're not going to overdose from getting these vitamins and minerals from food. So I just really encourage the food form of them, unless of course something's warranted where we need to supplement, like the iron example. Opinion on caffeine intake on competition days. Yeah. So, really, really great question. So there is some evidence to support that caffeine can help with performance, but I think it also gets, blown up a little bit in terms of how much someone's taking. So there's a lot of individual differences in how we metabolize caffeine and how it's going to impact us. So say, for example, you're somebody who has hardly any caffeine in your diet, and then all of a sudden you take a caffeine pill or you take an energy drink with a lot of caffeine right before. You just don't know how you're going to respond to it. And you could respond differently on different days too, because of the differences with metabolizing that. So you may get really jittery. It may have a little bit of a diuretic effect in that it might be a bit dehydrating. It also might, if it's taking the place of other pre-game fuel, like that carbohydrate or adequate fluids and water, that could be detrimental as well. So I think it's something I think it has been shown that it can can have some benefits, but it's best done through a conversation with somebody to figure out, well, what would be appropriate for that? And, you know, does that look like a cup of coffee a few hours earlier, or what might work best for that individual? There's a lot of individual differences. So it's kind of a long answer on that one, but so to summarize it, there's some benefit. There could be some benefits, but a lot of individual variation. And I really encourage you to either talk to a dietitian or somebody who knows the kind of sport nutrition and how best to see if that would be supportive for that person. All right. Oh, logged off. All right. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. Any other questions that come to mind? I need to always remember to just give a few seconds in case people do have questions but don't speak up right away or are typing. So I'll just sort of wait another few seconds to see if anything else comes in there. Just while I'm waiting to see if anything else comes in on the note of supplements, I did just sort of have a little slide I added just at the end here. You know, just making sure to check, you know, as a checklist, is this a safe thing? Is there any banned substances? Is there any research for a supplement to be effective? There's so much money in the marketing of supplements that they can just sound amazing. But there's a lot of considerations that go in, and foods first often can, you know, provide that and at a much lower cost. So I'll just sort of leave that up. Well, I'll wait to see if any last questions from anyone. All right. Well, if there's no more questions, thank you all so much for listening. If anything, you know, does come up that you wish you had asked and forgot, here's my email, alison@casinmind.ca, and happy to respond or follow up with anything. But otherwise, thank you all so much and enjoy the rest of your Sunday night, and hope you got some great sort of nutrition tips to support your soccer. Thank you. Right. Thanks, everyone. All right. Thank you all, and have a great night. I'll log it off there.